Here's the Pretenders in Italy. They've been touring as the main guests of U2 in Europe this summer. The band's debut album was released 7 years ago. It reached #1 in the album charts and was one of the biggest successes in 1980. Since drummer Martin Chambers left a few years back, these days it's a completely new lineup. A few years after the release of their debut album, 2 of the 4 members pictured here were dead as a direct result of drug abuse. Bass player Pete Farndon on the left and guitarist James Honeyman-Scott on the right. When I spoke to Chrissie Hynde in Dublin's Gresham Hotel a few weeks ago, before the Pretenders played Croke Park, I asked her about her general attitude to that very rock and roll cliche these days. So, how do you look upon all that stage now? I mean, do you think, first of all, that rock and roll is different now, and the post-Live Aid sort of time of rock being an instrument for good in some ways, with U2 probably being at the forefront of that? Do you think that there is a lot less of that stupidity of the old-fashioned idea of...
Yeah, I think that sort of myth of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll is just, like, boring now. And it's become very much like, well, I'm a terrible name dropper, but when I used to hang out with Sid Vicious, and he'd say his mother used to wear a caftan and drive a big motorcycle. And he would say, we would have nothing to do, and he'd go, well, we can always go to my mum's and smoke hippie drugs. And that's what he associated, like, smoking pot with his mother. That was, like, kind of like a hippie thing and of the older generation. And I think now, if I were 17 years old and I was trying to get into a band, I would see that whole cocaine thing and all that as very much a old hat, not very interesting. And also, it's 1987. There's a lot of issues at hand in the world that are, you know, we can't really afford, none of us can afford to sit back and be that self-indulgent. You know, when a third of the ozone's been destroyed in the last 8 years. 500 million animals are slaughtered every year in British slaughterhouses. The River Rhine has completely been destroyed last year. You know, this is we're getting sort of, it's closing in all around us. The environmental issues are now so coming to the fore so much. I think people will start taking heed, you know, and starting to, I mean, it's sort of like make up your mind time for people in bands and for adults in general, to start becoming a little bit conscious of real problems in the world, because we're not going to have anything to breathe in a couple more years if we don't put some things right. I think the practice of meat eating should be illegal. It's unnecessary, it's cruel, it's unhealthy. I mean, I'm talking about 1,000 animals per minute are slaughtered every day for no reason. There's not one reason. The reason is because people like the taste. Now, to me, that's akin with, I see the practice of meat eating very akin to child molesting. People say, well, you can make your own decision about it. People are allowed to have the freedom of choice to decide what they want to eat. I don't think it's freedom to decide that you want a meat-based diet, which means 2/3 of the world starves, because over 50% of the world's grain is fed to animals. And the return in animal protein that we come back, opposed to vegetable protein, it squanders the world's resources. It's a disgrace what it does. I don't think anyone should be given the choice to eat something that means someone else will starve to death, or be given the choice to eat something that means an animal will have to live a life of misery and get his throat cut for no reason other than you like the taste. I mean, it's something that's been promoted for a long time by a very wealthy industry, the meat industry, which is tied up like that with the drugs industry and a lot of other big corporations which run the world. I wouldn't go and put a bomb through a butcher shop window, because what it does is it just gets people's backs up. I don't think it really stops anything. But I will do everything I can to promote education. That's really what it's all about. Because people don't have to have high blood pressure. They don't have to have heart disease. They don't have to be overweight. And they don't have to spend the kind of money they spend on food. You know, nobody has to go hungry. I stopped eating meat when I was 17. I'm 36. I'm 35. I always add a year to my age. It makes me look better for my age, but but I've got to be serious now. I stopped eating meat when one day. In fact, I'm still ashamed that it took me so long to wake up and smell the coffee. But it occurred to me one day what I was doing. And also I was lucky to be part of that sort of hippie thing, and it was a higher consciousness, which was the thing that hippie thing was really trying to get at. I mean, I know if you watched that program, it's 20 years ago today, about the Beatles, you know, at the first half an hour, everyone was like, oh, it was great. And after 45 minutes, you're like, oh, thank God that's over. You know, because it just was talking about the cops and robbers after a while. But this is what we're on about now with this meat issue. I don't even like using the word meat because it says in the Bible, on the first page of the Bible, I'm giving you herb-bearing seed, and for you it will be used as meat. You know, meat, they've even stolen the word meat, you know, as a form of food, and, you know, given it a very dirty connotation. And vegetarian, even that word, I'm tired of that. I mean, we're really talking about eating flesh opposed to not eating it, you know, and the meat industry is constantly changing its vocabulary. If you were to get the Meat Trades Journal every week, they say things like, the public would like to get away from the bloodier side of slaughter. So they start saying, we won't use the word slaughterhouse, we'll call it a meat plant or a meat factory. And, you know, they're always trying to update their thing and get away from grossing people out with the truth. If you had any idea what you were eating, most people wouldn't, they would change their diet tomorrow.